This is Thrivenomics, presented by Thrive Mortgage.
Well, hello there. Welcome to a special episode of Thrivenomics. I'm James Duncan, your host. I'm sitting here with our illustrious Chief Financial Officer, Michael Jones. Hello, Michael.
Hello.
And joining us is Dr. Marty Makary, and there's a very significant reason as to why we wanted to have Dr. Makary on with us, and we'll get to his introduction here in just a second. But one of the things about being at Thrive Mortgage is that we're not just your typical mortgage banker. We like to. It's not that we take up causes necessarily, but we know that there's more to life than just mortgages, and so we try and get engaged in topics that matter and in issues that matter, and that's what Thrivenomics is really about. It is most of our episodes are about personal finance and the world of real estate, but a lot of times, especially during what's going on right now with COVID-19 and all of the quarantining taking place, not just in the United States but all over the world, we know that it's really important to have engaging conversations with known specialists and with known experts in other fields. And so that's what we're doing today. So our guest is Dr. Marty Makary. Dr. Makary is a world-renowned physician and researcher, and he's also a professor at Johns Hopkins University. I'll let him kind of get a little bit more into his background and his areas of expertise. But Dr. Makary, thank you very much for taking time out of your exceedingly busy schedule and making time to come and meet with us today. We really appreciate it.
Always good to talk to two Texans.
Good way to put it. Well, we'll definitely welcome you. And even though for those of you listening to the audio of this, obviously you can't see, but he's got a big old 10-gallon hat with a big foam star in the middle. So I'm just kidding, not wearing that. But anyway, Dr. Makary, why don't you take a few minutes and just kind of explain your background, what your area of expertise is, and why you were so highly sought after as an expert consultant in regards to what's going on right now in the world.
Well, it was kind of an accidental expertise, if you will. I never intended to understand COVID as deeply as I do, but the issue is, as editor-in-chief of one of the large news outlets in medicine, MedPage Today, I've had to learn about what's happening and read the articles that come through. And as I heard a lot of the public discourse, I realized there was a massive disconnect between the infectious diseases experts who knew how contagious this was and how more dangerous it was than influenza, and what we were hearing from other people out there about, don't worry, this shouldn't be too bad. And I got kind of frustrated, to be honest with you, seeing the news bring on political pundits to talk about their prediction of whether or not this was going to be a problem. And so finally, I couldn't handle it anymore after the entire month of February, trying to sound the alarm, trying to tell businesses and schools and old folks to get ready, to prepare, to write up contingency plans, to get ready to have people work from home and stop non-essential travel and prepare for reducing public gatherings, and asking the mayor of Austin to postpone or cancel South by Southwest. Same for Mardi Gras, same with the NCAA. I couldn't believe that sort of everyone was planning life as usual when I knew that all the experts were saying that sheltering and social distancing were very powerful tools in reducing the death toll and in reducing the burden on our hospitals, as many were forecasting at the time that we were about to get overwhelmed. And sure enough, our hospitals, thank God that we've got enough ventilators, it looks like, but sure enough, we've basically postponed all healthcare that's not urgent right now.
Right.
And so, I decided in early March to write a very strong letter to the doctors in the country through MedPage Today, saying that I'm very concerned about this disconnect. So that's how I ended up here. Really, I'm a surgeon and a goofball and an aspiring Texan, but I ended up having to be in the middle of this hurricane of COVID-19 right now.
Sure. Well, we'll certainly do everything we can to get your Texan sponsorship put in place. So we got that covered. Regarding the article that you wrote, what was it that was there anything specific that you were either reading or hearing from colleagues or hearing from other infectious disease experts that was really kind of sounding that alarm loud and clear in your mind and causing that disconnect of what you were seeing covered in the news versus the reality of what you knew to be science?
Well, the biggest obvious thing was that Wuhan, the Wuhan province of China, was turning into hell. And we were
Mhm.
hearing from doctors over there, and they couldn't even count the body bags, and they were shutting down all elective surgery, all of
Mhm.
transplant in all of China shut down. They were moving doctors to this Wuhan province. And it's a virus which is contagious and has a long incubation period or time when you can be a silent carrier.
Mhm.
And why did we think that was not going to spread elsewhere? And I realized, hey, people are traveling in and out of China. They're going, maybe not be coming to the United States because we had an early cutoff, but they were going to Europe, and people in Europe were going to get infected and come to the United States. And so I like the idea of American exceptionalism, but I realized it was turning into an arrogance that, oh, that couldn't happen here. And it's like,
Mhm.
no, actually, the transmission vectors are showing that it's headed right our way.
Interesting. So I think that you were one of the earliest professionals in the medical community that was actually reaching out to the organizers of South by Southwest, urging them to cancel. Obviously, South by Southwest is a huge event every year here in the Austin area. Do I have that correct? That you were
Yeah,
one of
you
the
know,
first ones to reach out to them?
yeah. I wouldn't say I was one of the first, but maybe one of the loudest. There was an incredible grassroots effort in the city of Austin among the members of the community to say, please, let's err on the side of safety. And
Okay.
essentially, I joined that effort and then tried to use my national platform to urge the organizers to postpone or cancel.
Good. Well, obviously, as it turns out, I mean, hindsight being what it is, it's probably a huge blessing that did happen because, as you're aware, I mean, it's an international. It's not just a national event; it's an international event, and there will be people coming in from all over.
And Mardi Gras went the other way, and we sort of got our control experiment here, right? Austin
Sure.
did the right thing. New Orleans did not. And look at the heavy price that they've paid in New Orleans, the
Yeah,
highest case fatality rate in the country.
that's astounding. Well, what is it? Let's kind of segue to into talking about. I know that for as long as it's been here, as long as it's been um, front page news, there's been all kinds of reports about how it affects the body and what organs or what systems in the body within the body this latches onto and really impacts the most. For the longest time, there was an understanding that it was respiratory, and then along came another theory that said no, it's not respiratory. It actually attacks the blood, and there were a bunch of other. I don't want to call them conspiracy theories because I think they were more than that, but there were other theories being postulated that this was a virus that attacked the blood in the way that the blood is set up to deliver oxygen to the rest of the body. And then along came another crowd that was trying to debunk that. And so I want to hear from you, from in your expert medical opinion, what do you think, or what do you know about the way that coronavirus impacts or infects a host or affects the human body?
Well, it's a great question. You know, it affects the lining of the respiratory tract. And believe it or not, your eyes and the fluid in your eyes, you know, I often ask the medical students, how far do you think your eyes are from your nasopharynx, which is the cavity inside your nose, the nasal passages? And they guess 2 centimeters, you know, an inch, 3 centimeters. It's like 3 millimeters. It's right there. And there's actually a duct that connects them. So the
Uh-huh.
fluid, you know, circulates between the oral cavity, your nose, and even through the ducts, you know, connecting the eye to the nasal cavity. There is this constant communication, or almost a circulation, if you will. Well, we know the virus selectively infects the lining of the respiratory tract, and that's why you can donate blood and it's safe. It is
Sure.
not bloodborne. When we do those finger stick checks, it's for the antibody response, for the immunity. It's not for the actual virus. And when people say, hey, is the NFL going to open up? I tell them it's not spread through sweat. Okay. So yeah, sure, those guys are tackling. It's a heavy contact sport. But hopefully by that time, we've learned it is hard for this virus to hurt a young, healthy person. The reason we've asked young, healthy people to shelter in place and take this thing seriously and even close schools is because they are community transmitters and they can deliver the virus to the most vulnerable parents, grandparents, others they interact with, teachers, coaches, athletic directors, other folks who may be vulnerable. And we had to change our routines because this peak, the time when, it's calm outside on the streets and it's a nightmare inside our ICUs and emergency rooms, that peak is something we had to manage with every single thing we had in the toolbox. And that meant sheltering and distancing and everything. Once we get beyond the peak, we can start releasing people with certain criteria. And we're seeing the return to work roadmap now get announced. And I think we've got a nice roadmap. But that's the summary of it. Respiratory infection spread by droplets, not truly airborne unless the droplet from your mouth or your voice or your breathing gets sprayed into the air temporarily.
Mm-hmm.
And when we know it gets hot and humid, it is harder for those droplets to travel. And that's why generally in the summer, in the hot months, we see a slight reduction in some of these infections.
All right. Well, that's good news.
There's a lot of good news actually, but we'll focus on whatever you want. Are you an optimist or a pessimist? Michael's ready to jump in here.
I tend to be an optimist. Michael, what say you?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I'm an optimist as well. And I have a question, and certainly I don't want to dive into conspiracy theories and things like that. But as we're finding now, a month or so into this thing, it's clear to me that our intelligence community knew that there were concerns and risks, and yet I don't feel like we sounded the alarm quickly enough, really at the national level. Do you feel like that was a response to try to keep the masses as a whole from panicking because we truly weren't ready to try to tackle this on a large scale? Or do you think it was an optimism that we were going to be protected, that the mortality or the fatality of this was not going to be as high? I mean, why do you think we were so slow to react?
Well, first of all, I'm really thankful for Tom Cotton, some of these intelligence briefings, and the people that had the common sense to realize that our immune system is not stronger than the immune system of a Chinese person or an Italian. We are as susceptible as they are. And what happened there and what was happening in Italy could and absolutely would happen in the United States, and hopefully to a lesser degree if we use all the tools in our toolbox. So I'm glad that some of those early folks did sound the alarm. I have been very disappointed, and this is, out there now in public. I've written about it in the MedPage Today article a month and a half ago with Anthony Fauci. Anthony Fauci has done a great job with other epidemics, with other infections, with calming the country at a time when we needed to address hysteria. But with this one, he missed it. With this one, and remember, he is the top infectious diseases doctor in the government. He is the top infectious diseases expert advising our top leaders at the highest level. And he is the most respected physician in virology. But you know what? He's a human being, and he's one doctor with one opinion, and he puts his pants on one leg at a time, just like we do. I'm not saying he needs to be infallible. I'm just saying that he is a human being, and every now and then he will make a mistake, even though he's done a lot of great things. He has gotten some things wrong in the past. For example, with HIV, he believed that it was most likely going to be a vaccine that allows us to manage HIV and the HIV epidemic. And he's spent $5 million and got some criticism from Tom Coburn and others in the Senate. He spent $5 million on HIV vaccine awareness, okay? He believed a vaccine would get us out of the crisis if we were gonna get out of it, most likely. You know what? He was wrong. It was not a vaccine that enabled us to get out of the HIV epidemic. It was an antiviral. Okay. He's a vaccine guy. And right now he's putting a lot of stake in vaccines. That's his slant. I'm not saying he's a bad person, but on the spread of the infection from early on, remember, he's a virologist. He's not an epidemiologist. Now, he knows something about global spread of infections, but he was at odds with some of the epidemiologists. And on January 21st, after we watched cases in Wuhan, after we knew this was coming to the United States, he said publicly on television, this is not something for the American people to worry about right now. Well, I wish he would have said, this would be a good time for us to do some contingency planning and get some PPE and start talking about manufacturing some more ventilators and get some medications in the United States before those doors shut down from exports. Mm-hmm. So that was, he was about 2 months late to the game. By mid to late March was the first time he ever said anything about sheltering or stopping non-essential travel and some of those other precautions. That is one of the reasons I think, in retrospect, some of the policies that we could have been planning for a little early may not have been discussed publicly. And I think overall, there's a lot of positive things that happen, closing some of the travel between China and some other maneuvers, keeping an eye on it early. Those were good steps, but that's my assessment of maybe why there was not quite the public awareness. He is the doctor the media put on. And, maybe there's a lesson here. Let's not put our entire faith and hope in one doctor, okay, because he got it wrong. Now, look, people love him. He can explain how a virus mutates and duplicates and grows and spreads better than anyone. He's eloquent. He's a master. He's great with the media. And he's an amazing, true gentleman, one of the most polite, kind 79-year-olds you've ever met. I'm not saying he's a bad person. I'm just saying we put our entire faith in him. If there were 100 media spots on all the networks, all the Sunday shows, all the evening shows in January and in February and in the first half of March, he was on 99 of those segments. And so the alarm could have been sounded by him earlier. And, I don't think Mike Pence is a virologist who went to medical school. He relies on experts like Anthony Fauci and other policy leaders. So that's why I decided to write the article in early March saying, hey, we've got a disconnect here. And I love Anthony Fauci, but I think he has not sounded the alarm as we should have to get ready, not to create hysteria, but to get ready.
That brings up an interesting conversation or an interesting question in my mind. There has clearly been some heavy criticism levied on the World Health Organization recently as well. Do you feel that criticism is warranted?
Well, I worked with the World Health Organization for 3 years on the surgery checklist with Atul Gawande, and I can tell you it was very frustrating dealing with that bureaucracy. It's interesting. The United States gives 15% of their overall funding. Bill Gates himself gives 10%. And then he goes down the list, and China is down there, a small fraction. And we have been, countries have not been paying their fair share. Why does the WHO not recognize Taiwan as a country? Okay, why isn't anybody talking about that? Maybe because it's China's influence on the WHO. Doctors should not be influenced. Okay, we are supposed to be apolitical. We're supposed to be objective, right? And when you introduce that factor into the WHO, it gets very messy. So I am frustrated with the WHO. But Michael mentioned you referenced the thing and what happened in China. It's very interesting. We will never have people ask me, do you think this was engineered in a lab? Do you think this came from a lab? I'll give you my honest opinion. I don't think it was engineered. The mutation just does not appear to be an engineered mutation. I think it's entirely plausible that it came from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, because we know they've been trying to study and acquire coronaviruses from bats in southern China. It was probably, it's plausible that it was an accident where somebody who works there got infected. There are reportedly sources that have confirmed that. And take these data points. The Wuhan Institute of Virology is 5 miles from the hospital, the Wuhan Central Hospital, where these cases were diagnosed, the early cases. The first doctor to really sound the alarm and say, hey, this looks like something worse than the SARS, and it's going to be big, and I'm concerned. Guess what happened to him? He's no longer alive. Now you could argue, hey, he got the coronavirus, which we know he did. Maybe he just died from the coronavirus. Sure, that's possible, but he was 34 years old. Okay, 34-year-olds generally have a very low case fatality rate, below 1 in 500. He died. His partner, who also sounded the alarm and said, hey, this is a big concern for the world, posted on social media as well. He was silenced by the government. We know the first doctor, Dr. Wen Liang, the one who died, we know that he was summoned to the police over in Wuhan, and the police told him, and I've got the direct quote, they basically told him to shut up. And then he posted a picture of himself and some other things. They told him he's creating public unrest.
Right.
So they sanctioned him. He died. The number 2 guy suddenly became silent, and the number 3 doctor involved, Dr. I. Fen, was posting very concerning posts on this social media platform they have. It's similar to Twitter, although nothing is as nasty as Twitter. But they have their own thing called Weibo in China.
That's a completely different conversation that we could really dive into.
But Dr. Fen wrote an essay and posted it on social media saying she's extremely concerned. Okay, guess what? Dr. Fen has been missing since April 1st. And now her social media posts are these weird things as if the government is posting on her behalf, just very weird, uncharacteristic. A lot of data points there that make you really wonder, did somebody at the Wuhan Institute of Virology contract the infection while working on bats from southern China with coronavirus, got infected, went to the local hospital, the one 5 miles away, told the doctor, hey, I work at the lab, I got the virus, or I got it from my friend who works at the lab. And the doctors saw the concern, tried to sound the alarm, and were silenced. It's all plausible. But then again, it would require an investigation with cooperation by the Chinese government to really get at this. I don't think we're going to have that.
Good luck.
And honestly, we're not a country of revenge. We need to move on. I'm not sure
Correct.
how productive it is to dwell on it.
All right. Well, in light of moving on, what are you seeing as some of the more positive treatments that are most effective, or even prevention measures that that people in the public can take in order to, number one, have the best chance of avoiding contracting it in the first place, and number 2, if they do get it, what are some treatments that are working better than others?
Well, there's one therapy that is 100% effective in killing the virus on the spot, and that is soap and water and alcohol and bleach. So, it's interesting. We like to look for a pill in everything. That's just part of our modern medical era, right? The medicalization of ordinary life and the pill culture where we got to have a pill to solve all of our problems in life. Let's just remember, we've got soap and water. We've got alcohol. You want 70% or higher, or you want bleach. CDC has recommendations on diluting bleach. In terms of the medications out there, again, I said Fauci's a vaccine guy, and then there's a separate category called separate category of medications called antiretrovirals. There's actually a couple other types of therapeutics, and let me give you those categories.
Okay.
The anti-cytokine storm medications. That is, when you get the infection in your lungs, the reason that you die is the body is attacking the lungs with this inflammatory response loaded with these things called cytokines, and we call that the cytokine storm, and that's why you have trouble exchanging oxygen in your lungs. There are medications that are designed to reduce that cytokine storm. Another category of medications is stem cells. Okay, stem cells, both your body's own stem cells or stem cells that could be injected and targeted towards the lungs, could help regenerate the damaged tissue quickly. And finally, it's antibody therapy. That is, we give the antibodies from somebody who's recovered to somebody who has the infection. Those are the 5 categories of therapeutics. Now, the ones that are getting all the media attention are not the ones I'm most excited about or optimistic about. What's getting a lot of media attention is hydroxychloroquine, vaccines, and remdesivir. Now, hydroxychloroquine, I caution people against that medication. Look, if I was in the ICU on a ventilator, give me everything, right? Give me hydroxychloroquine. The mechanism makes sense. There's no good solid data right now that's on a large scale, but you know what? Based on that small study in France and a couple other small studies, given the risk, and if I'm on an ICU, give it to me, okay? But if we see a benefit, it's going to be a relatively small benefit, in my personal opinion. The reason we're talking so much about hydroxychloroquine and remdesivir is those are 2 of the only medications already out there for other things. They're already approved, so we doctors don't have to go through the massive FDA red tape to get them to our patients. So that's why you're seeing people use it right away. Hydroxychloroquine, by the way, small risk of heart arrhythmias, and that's why I don't recommend people take it at home or prophylactically, that is to prevent it.
Sure.
Remdesivir has a clinical trial just published a week ago in the New England Journal of Medicine. 34 patients in an ICU got remdesivir on compassionate use basis. 18% of them died. Not bad. Normally it's 30 to 50% die. 18% dying. A small sample, that's better. That's better. Not a bad result. Small sample. So there may be something there. Again, it's not going to be a silver bullet, but it could help reduce mortality. I'm most excited about the stem cell therapy. The vaccine thing, I'm not close enough to know whether or not the vaccine thing is plausible. On one hand, on the downside, vaccines can be hard. We have never had a vaccine for the common cold or other coronaviruses. What makes us think we're going to come up with one in 4 weeks here? On the positive, the flu shots are not that sophisticated, right? We take a piece of the non-active piece of the virus coat, the protein, duplicate it in the lab and give it to people. And most people develop an immunity. Not that sophisticated, pretty simple, could work. Why not try it? If you look at how we invented penicillin, biochemist noticed that this penicillin plant, it's actually a fungus, but think of it as like a plant. It grew on the Petri dish in his lab. And when it grew over the Petri dish, it killed all the bacteria on there. And he thought, this is weird. This penicillin plant is killing all the bacteria. Then his daughter got sick with an infection. He gave it to her and she got better. Then World War I happened and soldiers got infections from battle and they were dying of these infections. And they said, let's try penicillin. And guess what? Thousands of lives were saved because of it. So we can learn something from the approach of taking what we believe to be safe and doing trials where we can establish safety and then establish efficacy.
So I have a little bit of a question. Hopefully this isn't jumping too far ahead, but as at both a federal and state level, we're beginning to look at what it takes to open up and what activities can we begin to engage in first. I suppose two questions. One is, what activities, regardless of whether or not they're allowed, would you advise the general populace? Let's say that your normal folks, not sick, not immunocompromised, not elderly, to avoid. And secondly, we're all being encouraged to wear these masks, and I've heard that the masks are really only to prevent like coughing and sneezing from spraying out to the air. That's really not supposed to stop just normal breathing, correct? I mean, we're not trying to stop our breaths. We're trying to stop projectile, correct? Or can you explain that further?
Sure. Well, first of all, there's no controversy about wearing masks if somebody has symptoms. If you have symptoms, you should definitely wear a mask. Matter of fact, in Asian cultures, that's been acceptable for decades. And it's interesting, if you've ever been to a grocery store or out in public before COVID-19, and you've seen somebody wearing a surgical mask just out there in the public, chances are they were Asian, because it's an accepted part of Asian culture. Well, one of the silver linings here is that we are finally now changing our cultural norms, and we're recognizing that's good practice in the regular seasonal flu or anytime somebody's sick. So there's no controversy. If you have symptoms, you should wear a mask. If you don't have symptoms, the guideline is to wear a mask if you cannot maintain the 6-foot social distance. Now, it's not just coughing and sneezing. Sometimes it's breathing. Sometimes it's breathing heavy. Sometimes it's clearing your throat. Some people can just sort of expectorate some fluids through, taking a deep breath and breathing out. And so when you have everybody, say, in a public area, like a, grocery store, wearing a mask, there's a certain security to it, because it's very hard to maintain that 6-foot distance consistently. Again, these are temporary measures. Nobody should be wearing a mask when they're, sitting in a park by themselves without symptoms, unless they're worried they could come in contact with somebody. So I think, we've been trying to do everything to help those of us in healthcare getting overloaded with the influx of patients. Once we see a 14-day reduction in the number of cases in an area, in a city, in a state, then the guideline is that we can start to do more. And I think the most important part of the roadmap to get back to work is that phase 1 and phase 2 still shelter people who are at risk. Vulnerable people need to stay sheltered through phase 1, phase 2. So people are debating, can we go to a bar in phase 2? Can we, how close can the tables be in a restaurant in phase 1? The most important thing is that those at risk stay hunkered down, because those are the ones who are vulnerable. And if you live with somebody, if you interact with anyone who's on chemo or had an organ transplant or is immunosuppressed or is over 65 years of age, that is where the risk lives. We know it's hard for this virus to hurt somebody young and healthy, okay? But that is where we have to start delineating society and say, like, you're low risk, you can engage in these activities, but minimize your contact with anyone who's at risk.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Appreciate it.
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely a concern for me, because I have an elderly father who is in an assisted living facility, and I have made it clear to him under no uncertain terms. He's very gregarious. He loves being outside. I said, Dad, just stay where you are. I will come and pick you up, and we'll go for a drive and go pick up some lunch somewhere and let you get out. But you stay there. And so it's been kind of hard to at first it was hard to convince him, but then when I raised my voice at him for the first time in 25 years, he got the message. So he's staying put. But yeah, to what I think was Michael's second question, and you started to allude to it, and there was a report that you endorsed. I believe it was put out by the American Enterprise Institute, and it was their roadmap for recovery and basically easing the quarantine and stay-at-home orders, and in a way that we can begin to open up the economy more. You mentioned phase 1 and phase 2. At what point because obviously human beings have very short memories, at what point do you think it becomes dangerous to open? What would be opening too quickly in your mind versus the right time frame?
Great question. First of all, the sheltering and distancing is working so well right now. It has avoided a mini zombie apocalypse that we could have experienced. Okay.
Right.
It has saved so many lives, maybe even over 1 million lives. It's hard to know, but many, many lives have been saved in every city in America because of these extreme measures that we've asked people to do, and they're doing beautifully. Now, in terms of the roadmap to get back to work, we got to remember this virus is pooping out every time it infects somebody and then cannot jump to another person. That is an end transmission, and that virus in that person gets defeated and it dies, and that's where it ends. And so we break that chain of transmission when we have sheltering and distancing. So we've reduced the burden of this virus in society significantly. We want that to be low. And then we get, assuming it's still active then and has not mutated into a less serious form, we get a do-over. We get to do this over again, but this time with knowledge, with distancing, with education, with protocols, with Purell laying around everywhere we go. And we get to have testing and tracing and isolation. So once we get to a certain, once we've reduced the burden in society, we have our opportunity to manage this. And I don't think we're going to eradicate it. I wish we would. My original prediction was we'd be back to work in June. I still think we're on track for that. I'm excited to see young, healthy people who exercise good distancing might be able to get back to work sooner in May. But every region's different. And I think we need to just remember that we've done a tremendous job here. Now we're cleaning the board, starting over, and we can manage this thing by doing all the right things on this next go around. And the next go around is probably going to be May and June, when there's going to be more cases, maybe even in September. And if I could just tell those listening, when you hear about cases coming back in September, do not panic. Okay, that's expected. And what we're hoping is that those cases that come back in the fall in the so-called second wave, that it's manageable, that the burden is less than the regular seasonal flu, that it's not too disruptive to our lifestyle, and that we can use a lot of these distancing and basic techniques at that time. Because let's face it, we're doing all these things to buy time, and hopefully they'll be our therapeutic.
I think what may be our last question, just as we're looking to wrap up here, and I want to acknowledge the fantastic work that you did in your book, The Price We Pay. We have read that as an organization. We have recommended that to many people, and we're working to follow that. But as there is the inevitable cost that is coming for individuals that have to go to the hospital for treatment, family members that have to go to the hospital for treatment, and in light of all of the federal regulations about how this is supposed to be treated, both from an employer level and probably from a hospital level, what would you recommend to somebody that goes in for, possibly costly tests or costly treatment, and they get a shocking bill from the hospital or wherever they receive treatment? Where would you recommend that they start to try to get help there?
Well, great question, Michael. First of all, many of us have urged the government to put some conditions on the $100 billion they're giving out to hospitals. Okay, one of those conditions is you cannot surprise bill, or what we call balance bill, patients who get any COVID-related treatment. Okay, if you're going to be getting all this free money, okay, stop the predatory billing. And we try to do it for all predatory billing. And what we walked away with was for COVID-19 related treatment. Now we're still going to keep pushing. We're going to push to stop price gouging and predatory billing in healthcare. It's a disgrace. It's a disgrace to those of us that love our jobs in healthcare. And it violates the doctor-patient relationship. And to be honest, it violates the IRS criteria for a nonprofit, in my opinion. Billing quality is medical quality, and financial toxicity is a medical complication. And taking care of a person is taking care of the entire person, not just seeing them and then allowing some billing office to ruin someone's life financially. So we're pushing. If you get a bill and it seems too high, we've put up several resources on how to negotiate that bill and how to fight it on our website, restoringmedicine.org. And you can go to under the patients tab in restoringmedicine.org, and you'll see 20 things you can do to help negotiate your bill. So it's an important topic. I'm glad you raised it, Michael. It's something I'm very passionate about, and it's something I wrote about extensively in the book, as well as little did I know, the writing about how we got so dependent on China in a book that came out this past fall would be so timely right now. I mean, I hope and pray to God never again that we will be shopping in China for medical supplies in a crisis. That's a disgrace. We need some basic reforms, country of origin labeling on all medications and medical devices. And we need to look at the middleman industry in healthcare that's driven up a lot of the costs that I write about in the book.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I'm hopeful that some of that coming back, to the States and possibly other countries will actually allow some folks that are displaced to find new work with some of that may be coming back to the States. So I'm kind of excited about that.
Yeah, that I'm very glad that you asked that question, because that was actually when in chatting with my wife, who I mentioned earlier as an RN, I said, what questions do you want to hear him answer? And that question right there specifically was one of the first ones that came out of her mouth. Is there hope for, as bad as the situation is there a silver lining of there potentially coming healthcare reforms? Or is this going to be something where it's just panic, let's fix the panic, and then everything goes back to the way it was? And so based on what your answer, Dr. Makary, it sounds like you're hopeful. You seem to be hopeful that some of these reforms may actually get enacted and give us a chance to reform the healthcare system into what it should be. Would you say that's accurate?
Well, those of us who believe we should have health security, that is, we should have the ability and capacity to make our own medications, our own devices, our own ventilators, and have surge capacity for times of crisis. We do have the ear of the policymakers right now, and we're urging them to create incentives that encourage the production of medications and devices in the United States, or at least in combination, both in the United States and with friendly, honest allies that we have around the world.
Right.
I hope to goodness we are never again shopping in China for PPE and in India for medications. So it's a big issue. I hope we get some momentum. There's a lot of silver linings that are coming out of this terrible crisis. That's one. The FDA moving these archaic Stone Age regulations is another one. I mean, you should read the article in the Dispatch where the guy who came up with an early test for COVID-19 sent his application in electronically to the FDA back in January. This is a researcher at the University of Washington. Didn't hear anything, finally follows up and is told, oh, you have to also submit it by paper mail. Okay, some of your viewers may not even know what paper mail is, but you can Google it, right? And then was told, and you have to include a CD-ROM where you burn the files on the CD-ROM that you mail by paper mail. I mean, this is the FDA. This is the United States. That's a disgrace. Now you wonder why we lost 6 crucial weeks in testing because of that silly game. So some of these regulations are changing. We're going to save thousands of lives each year from people using good hygiene and social distancing. There's a lot of good stuff that's coming out of this, despite its heavy death toll. And I hope we do learn some lessons and we don't just get back to business as usual in healthcare.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, let's wrap it up with you giving a quick explanation of some of the best resources that are out there publicly available. You've already mentioned the journal that you run. Is it medpagetoday.com? That's the one?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. You also just talked about restoringmedicine.org. So are there any other resources either online or available through other means, books or anything that you would recommend the public kind of latch onto and use as their primary source of information?
I think there's a couple good resources. First of all, anything Scott Gottlieb puts out has been terrific on this. He's been on top of things.
Yep.
He is exactly what I was hoping Anthony Fauci would be publicly, and Scott has been following this. He's the former head of the FDA, so you
Okay.
can check him out, follow him on Twitter. I retweet a lot of his stuff, and I do try to aggregate some of the best information also on my Twitter handle, which is at Marty Makary. There's a couple good books. One is obviously The Great Influenza, a book about the 1918 pandemic, where we saw a lot of the same mistakes. And he was just recently the author on the Peter Attia podcast, which is an excellent podcast. I think also another good book is a book called Bottle of Lies by a woman named Catherine Eban, and she explains how we got so dependent on China for medications and the problems in these factories in India and all over the world, and how the FDA switched from surprise inspections to pre-announced inspections. And that was a big game changer in quality. And so that's a good book. But I think some of these news feeds are excellent. MedPage Today, we certainly try to put out good information out there.
All right. Excellent. Well, Dr. Makary, thank you so much for spending your valuable time with us today. We really appreciate the discussion and the dialogue, and you taking the time to answer all of our questions, as amateurish as they may have come across. But definitely appreciate the time and appreciate the relationship that we've been able to establish with you.
Well, Michael and James, thank you. You guys have a great reputation at Thrive, and it's a great business. I've heard a lot of great things about there. I do get to the Austin area frequently, and you should be proud of what you're doing there. And look forward to seeing you next time I'm in Texas.
Sounds great. You feel free to stop by anytime. We'll have mass for you.
Okay, great.
This is Thrivenomics. The title sponsor of this show is Thrive Mortgage. Licensed in multiple states across the U.S., Thrive Mortgage employs the best professionals equipped with leading technology and the most efficient process to deliver a legendary lending experience.
For more information about how we can serve you or to find a local mortgage professional in your area, please visit us at thrivemortgage.com.
Thrive Mortgage is an equal housing lender. NMLS number 268552.